Okay, so let me get right into it. Thank you, Diego, and thank you to the UE for accepting this presentation. Silver and Steel is really based on a simple premise. It's a curiosity. It starts off with, you know, the kind of curiosity of seeing the names of steel bands in Trinidad and Tobago deriving uh, their, their names from films that came to Trinidad from Hollywood in that golden age of American cinema. And really trying to take that um, that observation and explode it to look at deeper issues of the influence of capitalism and on identity politics, colonialism, and it's something that is shared between the Caribbean and other parts of the Americas. When you look at the names of footballing clubs or sporting clubs like Corinthians, the strongest in South America, my argument is that these are artifacts that encourage us and invite us to interrogate how these different spaces connect to each other. So let's start this genealogy in the 1780s. Now, the French Creole planters that came in with the second cellular population tend to be depicted as um, those who are kind of aspiring or in some ways beholden to the metropole. My argument is that what we're seeing in the early carnivals in Trinidad is the expression of a revolution, of a bourgeois invasion, not just in the carnivalist sense of, overturning the power of church and state in that just kind of spatial, that temporal window, but actual discarding of the strictures of, the religious dogma and the empires, the empires of Spain and France, which were in many ways weakened in that time frame. And that revolutionary ethos is carried over um, into the expressions of Carnival, right? I would argue. Going backwards. Okay. And it continues even with the arrival of the British, who in many ways attempt to alter the dynamic and enforce certain racial categories um, in the colonies, but are largely unsuccessful. And it's very interesting that their efforts to try to unbalance that scenario lead them to bring workers in from India, India of all places, India, which was um, central to the trade in cloth uh, that and textiles that brought Africans to the Caribbean, and uh, whose work was counterfeited quite extensively by the Europeans as a prelude to eventual invasion in the mid 1700s. Right? The story could then jump to, let's say, the 1850s. You have the French realizing that, or in some ways abandoning that project of empire in the Americas, sell off their property, or there's some complications there, but you basically have the United States taking up the old French Americas and heading west. And that expansion is driven by uh, ba- banks and financial firms that also spur movement of US capital and US multinationals south into the Caribbean and Central America. Now, that movement is coeval with the expansion of the U.S. military and U.S. Navy, and even though it was meant to be or was supposed to be to secure the United States and to prevent any involvement in European wars, eventually the coalescing of military power and economic expansion leads to um, the use of these forces to support um, the protection of US investments in the region. And so you have the occupation of the Great Antilles and the further um, penetration of US capital into the Caribbean region. And at this time, you already have the the basis of what becomes the golden age, emerging out of the copyright industries, the early copyright industries um, in New York, Tin Pan Alley, etc. So the interesting thing about this genealogy is that there are many choices being made. And one of those choices is the reaction of the masses to the influx of the American films. And my argument, as my father's argument in his work, um, was that the reaction of the masses was not necessarily to reform capitalism, the kind of broader um, global structure, but to attack colonialism. And in the youth culture, that's expressed by adopting, the bravado of the American storytelling, almost as a reaction against the colonial order and the British imperial culture. So, as as happened with many forms, I wanted to bring in the character of the Creole nationalist politician at this point. You know, um, that crossing over is driven by um, a Creole nationalist kind of aspiring bourgeois class that seeks to uh, absorb not just the energy and revolutionary potential, but the authenticity of the Steelpan movement as something that is representative of the national culture. And that is something you see with samba, with tango, with blues, the adoption of Afro diasporic form to somehow represent the nation. But in doing that, um, the corporate patronage and sponsorship in many ways changes and gives the um, steel pan this kind of Faustian bargain between acceptability, respectability, and internal coherence. And even while this is happening, you have Hollywood delivering the steel pan as this instrument of civility and almost nostalgia for the colonial plantation. So we kind of have a double movement happening. You have the Carnival, which I argue is a tradition born out of that victory of um, the revolution of capital, intersecting with an upstart steel band movement, which is an actual true movement from below, true popular culture. And the result or the answer, the choice seems to be at that point co-optation by the creole elite. But at the same time, and why I term this slide tyranny powerless, you have a clash of the steel pan movement with a population, a proletariat that has been, in many ways, educated by a declining European church or collection of European churches, and is therefore highly conservative, even reactionary. So you almost have the Carnivalesque in reverse, sorry, where the digression strengthens the social order. So my question there, therefore, is it waiting? Sorry, right? You have an imbrication of mass and popular culture. And what if mass was in fact an early form of commercial mass culture? What if Carnival never was really popular culture, but a celebration of the acquisitive power of and bourgeois rebellion of the creole elites? What if the revolutionary potential of the Steelpan was actually killed in its cradle by those who would give us independence, but independence from the wrong empire, all in the service of geostrategic considerations of the Cold War? Maybe George Bailey's art made us forget where we truly were, and perhaps Hearts, Tribe, and the BP logo over Renegade's Spaniard is there to remind us. So I'll end my presentation there. I hope it was useful, and it's just the beginning of a work that is developing and in progress. So thank you for listening.